Hello, my name is Jamar Brown with the Alliance for California's Economic Sustainability, or ACES for short. We are partnering with the best and brightest business speakers and consultants in order to help drive our mission of growing a vibrant and innovative economy in California by building powerful brand messages for organizations seeking optimal exposure, value-added marketing strategies, and premier business consulting. Our featured consultant today is Ray Anderson of Anderson Business Coaching. He will explain how he used his 30 years of experience to integrate the high-touch world of human dynamics with high-tech assessment tools. Ray started on the high-touch side as a Vietnam veteran and laborer, which led him to create a business that would quickly pull all levels of the staff together to meet strategic and tactical business objectives. He identified practitioners of the 5 principles of a no-collar workforce as good-hearted leaders. Ray will define these principles and concepts in more details during this presentation and how they can potentially benefit your business. Please, while watching this presentation, if you have questions for Mr. Anderson, feel free to ask them in the comment box below and we will get them answered for you as quickly as possible. Ray, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jamar. You know, in the fog of business, it's very difficult to get to where you want to go unless you know where you are. And what we're going to be talking about today is how we stop fighting fires and start preventing them with our quad strat assessment process. Before we begin, what we want to think about is a little bit about what we believe our assessment identifies 5 high-touch principles that are really important for a company to move forward. I'm going to begin with the first one, which is a unified vision. And I remember being with one executive who said very simply, he says, look, I don't know why we're paying you this money because everybody knows where we're going. And I said, well, why don't we just ask? And we spread out a sheet of paper to 7 other executives that were working with him, and as you might suspect, we had 7 different ideas as to where the company was going. He said, well, this is worth it. So that's what we're trying to help you understand. The second thing that I think is important is fearless communication. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had executives tell me, you know, I have an open door policy. I mean, they can come in any time. But when I go to the front line, the people who are actually doing the work, they're telling me, yeah, every time I bring something up, somebody calls me a troublemaker. How do we overwhelm or uncover the problems there and make them available for people to use in a very positive way? The third one is appropriate skills. Too many times we take for granted that somebody's skill sets are available and probably well tuned and honed for the position that they have, the job they occupy. But too frequently, what we find is that the executive thinks they're well trained, but you go to the front line and they feel like they're not getting any skill sets at all that are particularly relevant for their job. It's costing money, it's costing rework, it's costing scrap. The next item is meaningful incentives. Certainly money's important, but all the research that we know, usually money's about 5th or 6th. Recognition, challenge, a sense of belonging, all those things are far more important, and too many times I think they're missed. The last one is necessary resources, and we have a funny story. We were working in a company and the place was a mess, and there was a big sign on the wall that said, cleanliness is next to safety. So I asked the guy, I said, well, where's your broom? He says, we don't have one. And so this is a funny story, but the necessary resources to make this happen are always a part of this. So as we go through this presentation, the goal I have is to have you keep those things in mind. If we have those things working, then we're going to do well. How do we get to them? And this is the important part. What we're going to look at here is the quad strat high-tech value. And what that means specifically is knowing what the staff thinks about these 4 areas. First of all, it'd be interesting to find out what they think about the challenges your company is currently facing. And what you may find is they have a very different insight than you do. Second thing is, how could you improve the value you provide for your customers? If you knew what they were thinking, it may be that they're giving good value or they may be ignoring it completely. Number 3, where the staff could improve productivity to help grow your business. This is a really important issue and it's one that we don't look at very, very carefully. Next here is whether you or your team are walking your talk. Management modeling and values are extremely important to having everybody engage in your work. And as a Vietnam veteran, I understood that in the most difficult of circumstances. So what we want to do is really draw people in with these areas. So here's what we're going to show you. Basically, our quad strat has a best practice assessment. I'm going to go into some detail to show you why it's good and why it enables the executive to get access to this information that otherwise would be completely opaque to him. There are 2 elements of the quad strat. One is organizational strategy, and the second one is culture. The reason these are important, there are two core drivers for this small business version. Think of strategy as the bricks in a wall, and if you're an architect, he can't put it together unless he has the bricks. But the other side is the culture. Think of the culture as the mortar. And if you don't have enough mortar, ultimately it makes no difference what's going on. The first high wind comes along and it's over. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. The second thing is that there are 8 components. There are 4 in strategy and 4 in culture. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I just need you to know that we break this out in very precise detail because this is data that comes from research. There are 19 elements. We break these out so that when we collect data, we're getting data from you on these 19 elements, so it enables you to really take a very granular look at your organization, not from your perspective, from the people who are doing the work. So, the QuadSat report is divided into 4 major sections, and we're going to go through those in detail. Number 1 is the report card. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we're going to see it in detail. The second item is what we call our quadrant analysis. And that's the heart of all this and the technology that really makes this good. Item number 3 is our comparison chart. The neat thing about this is that, I find that too many business owners really don't have a good insight as to what's going on in the marketplace, or particularly among their competitors. This will then enable you to compare against 4,000 other companies, so you have a better sense as to how you're doing. And last, the frequency detail. And the frequency detail is more specifically about the responses that were given by your participants. It really helps you granularly look at what people think in terms of one group or internal to that group, and I'll show you more details of that in a moment. So let's take a look at the report card. This is the actual report you'll get when you participate in this, and we're going to give you that opportunity here at the end. Basically, the first thing is you'll notice the 60. That's the aggregate score of this company in relationship to all the other 4,000 companies that have been through this in the past. You see the capabilities and the constraints here on the right. Well, basically what it tells us is in those 4,000 companies, your organization did very well in the areas in the green, both in strategy and culture. The areas in kind of the burgundy are those that have opportunities for improvement for you. So it very quickly focuses you on things that are important, not because we said so, but because your staff, your management, and your executive board said so. Then if you look here on the left, you see you actually have a bar chart that says these are the top 10% of the companies, which are roughly 81%. They're in green. Then you have the mean from all the companies that have been through this, which is 68, and then you have the bottom 10%, which is at 50. So it quickly lets you know on a quantitative basis how you're doing against everybody else. This is the report card. Now we're going to go into a little more detail. And what you see down here in this corner are the number of participants and the 3 different areas. In companies, what we typically look for, we want executives, we want management, people who supervise somebody, and then finally frontline, and that could be the sales force, it could be production, it could be customer service, but we want their insights because they're close to the customer, and many times we miss those things. All right, so now we're going to part 2, the quadrant analysis, and this is the heart of our technology, and I think it's really a powerful example. You're looking at the sheet here that defines literally what was strong and what was weak. And as you look at this, on the left, from bottom to top, tells you what your scores were from low to high. The interesting thing about this, it goes from 30 to 90% based on the responses, and we'll show you those in more detail in a moment. On the bottom, from left to right, are the priorities. What's really important to the company? Not because I said so. Again, it's because this is the input. As we look at this, what's going to happen? As you can see here on the right, these performance areas are prioritized automatically in the report by the people taking them. So as an example, in this particular case, you can see customer service, finance, execution, sales, effectiveness, and marketing were the top 5. Now, this is an aggregate picture. When we go into the detail, you'll be able to see how the executives felt, how the management felt, and how the front line. And what you're going to find, as we find over and over again, there's a very different perception of priorities that for an executive can be very, very helpful in guiding him in the right direction. What you're looking at here is what we call quad red. And the reason that it's important is the quad red are those things that are high impact but low score. So in this particular case, we're looking at the strategy of the company. And what's happened here is that you can see finance, execution, vision, and customer profile in this particular context were perceived as high value but low score. Now this doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad as much as it's an opportunity for improvement. And for the executive, this is really helpful data because now, and what I found, instead of me pushing uphill, I'm now being able to pull this out of people because it's their information. They're telling us what's important, and this is really meaningful, not only to you, but to the organization itself. So this is our quad red. This is where we're going. This is where we want to go next. So let's take a look at the next piece, which is the comparison of the 4,000 other companies. As you can see here, what we've done is we've taken all the data that you saw in the quadrant and we've now broken it out by individual and in the same order as the priorities for all the participants. At the top we have service, and then it goes clockwise around from finance, execution, sales, marketing, etc. All these are important, but as you look at this, an interesting thing is that while the priorities here are the same, the small business report provides you this detail in a much more meaningful way. Specifically, you're going to be able to look at how you did against the comparison graph, and down here at the bottom you see the top are 10% are in blue, the overall are in green, the bottom 10% are in red, and you're in black. So the point is that you can very quickly see how you're doing against everybody else. And to me, that information in itself is meaningful, even though I have people tell me, well, wait a minute, I'm not the same company as these other 4,000. But the key is that this is the DNA of a business. These are based on best practice principles, and if companies follow this, they get much better results. And that's what we're trying to hit and make important to them. Now we're getting to the quad strat frequency detail. And I'm going to take a look at that and show you that. And what we've done is we've taken each of the questions, there are 59 in total, and in this particular case we're looking at customer service. And the bottom line is that as you look at it, what you get is that the top shows you what the score was, i.e. the frequency of detail could be strongly disagree or strongly agree. Those are important information for you to know, and you have now divided up by 3 different levels. Management, executives, and front line. So this is important. So this gives you the score so you know kind of what's happening. The second thing that this does, it gives you both the standard deviation for the entire group or for the question in itself, so you begin to see what's the strength or weakness of the responses of the people who are in it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take you through some more specific details on how we do an action planning process that takes this data, which is meaningful, but how do you apply it now to really make an organization change in a short amount of time? And we have some phenomenal results we're able to get in a matter of weeks using this data, and that's what's important here. So what we have is we take these elements and we break them out into 4 pieces of a business that are really important. First of all, the vision. How do you guide the business? The next part is customers. How do you manage to get the people that you need and the businesses you need to run profitably? The third part is operations. How do you do the business? And the last one is compliance. How do you make sure all the pieces that are necessary to run a business are running effectively? So we take this data in this way, and this is our own proprietary process, and we put the constraint questions to the entire staff and ask them to say, what would you like to do and how would you like to prioritize these? So the way in which we do this, these are the constraints. This is an unusual circumstance. Typically what we find is that there are 2 in strategy and 2 in culture. This particular company had 4 in strategy and 3 in culture, but I'm trying to help you understand that's what we draw from. It's those areas that we identified as quad red. So here's what we do. Quad strat production constraints, high priority but low score, and I'm going to let you see a couple of these in specific. Here, if you can take a look, in this particular context where we had management, executives, and front line, what you're going to see is you look at this, there's a lot of polarity between the groups. As an example here, we've got executives on the question, quality is embedded in our production process, and we've got 33% of the executives saying they don't know. Imagine if you're running a manufacturing company and 33% don't know if the quality is embedded or not. What's even worse, if you look at the front line, 29% of the respondents said they strongly disagree. that's where we run into, and we find that people really are challenged when they say, holy mackerel, how can it be that 29% of our frontline workers are telling us that quality isn't a part of this process? That's a scary observation. So let's take a look at now within a group. And here in this particular question, it says, our product or service production process is cost efficient. Now, it's not uncommon for a frontline worker not to know, but that's dangerous in our experience. We want them to know. Here, if you look at it, you have 14% of the front line that give it a 1, which means they strongly disagree. In contrast, we have 14% who strongly agree. The question that raises in my mind, and what we see too frequently, the experience of the frontline worker is dependent on his working relationship with his supervisor. If that relationship is bad, or it doesn't provide the kind of skill sets he needs, or the support, or those 5 elements, unified vision, appropriate resources, fearless communication, he will give it a bad score. So sometimes what this illustrates for me is that you've got some supervisory problems that you need to be looking at. It doesn't mean you have to replace them, but you may need to retrain them or rework them. All right, now let's take a little deeper look at this. And here's the action planning. What we do is we take those constraints and we now put them on another document, and we want the company to actually determine which ones to work on. We can't work on everything. So when we look at the constraints, what we simply do is we take each of the elements has 4 questions, and I'll simply say to the staff who's ever at the table, and I'll say, look, I want you to identify the question in these, and as an example from planning and execution, which ones you think are most important to the company here. And invariably what happens is we'll get different answers. Somebody will pick question 22, somebody will pick question 23, etc. But what we do then is say, let's make a consensus. Before we go any further, what one makes the most sense, how are we going to work together? And then we have the team pull together and create an objective around the statement they think is most reflective of that particular issue. The second thing is, during later sessions, what we do is we take that data, we now have an objective, and we assign resources. Who's going to do this? Could be somebody externally like me, but typically it's somebody inside the company. We also want to know who's the champion. And this is not the person who's literally doing it, but what we're looking for here is somebody who raises their hand and says, hey, I'd like to be a part of this process. I'd really like to be able to help. And so we want them to coordinate. So the executive is kept accountable by people internally to make sure that things are done. Many times when I come in organizations, they say it's Ray Day. And the point here is that everybody knows they've got something to do. I come in and hold them accountable. It's not what I do, it's the fact that people are doing something, moving ahead on these. The next is we typically put together a due date. And that due date is 1 week out. Normally we do 4 action planning sessions at 1 week increments. So when they have an objective, clearly, to develop a well-defined marketing plan is not something somebody can do in a week. But we can certainly, in 1 week, identify the key elements of a marketing plan or review the marketing plan we currently have. So that's what we try to do. So the due date is usually a week. The measurement is typically, what are we going to get done? Here in this example, it's we're going to review the plan. And then finally, the action is we will review the plan. So that's the process. That's how we work this, and this is how it kind of works for the company. In sum, my purpose here was to help you understand how we've been able to connect very, very powerfully high touch and high tech. And the high touch side, as I said before, is having everybody on the same page, a unified vision. The second thing is being able to communicate fearlessly, to know that when they're saying something, it's actually being used and talked about in a meaningful way. Second is appropriate skills. If they don't have the necessary skills, they're frightened. So we have to give them the skills to be able to do that. Meaningful incentives. Let them know you care. Tell them that it's really important. Give them insights. Provide for them the sense of importance that are meaningful, and then necessary resources. And I'm talking about the support and the other things. And people say to me, well, why would I do this? What would be the value of this, going through this assessment? You can look at our client results. We've gotten staggering results, productivity, scrap reduction, because people want to be involved. And this is where we take the high touch side and the high tech and make it work for you instead of against you.
Ray, that was a great program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. As you know, we had a small group of executives that we invited to come and watch the show in the green room, and there were a number of questions that I captured from our small studio audience. And the first one is, what are the expected results after 90 days of you working with a company and them doing the assessment?
Well, surprisingly, and you can look at some of our videos on that, but within a matter of weeks, we get key changes because we're focusing on things that are really important to them, not to us. And what happens is that people start communicating much more effectively. These questions are not easy to answer. And what we find many times is that both for the executive and the front line, it's humbling in what they don't know. And so as a consequence, there is a whole new birth of communication between departments that has been closed before. So the return on investment, while I can't measure it specifically, is enormous in terms of the change in the attitude about the company.
You know, this next question is pretty interesting because it leads me to believe that there's interest from the group that we invited. And the question is, what is the cost in time or money or otherwise of someone not moving forward with your program?
Well, I had a company once tell me, the executive says, well, you know, I don't want to train my people because they just leave. I said, well, how is ignorance working for you? And the truth of the matter is that, you know, when we don't know what workers are doing, the disengagement is enormous in terms of productivity, capital, and morale, all of which, you know, contribute to the culture that makes it work.
Okay, well, here's kind of a straightforward question. Do you guarantee results?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You know, the bottom line is that, you know, if there's just one idea, because of the cost of this process, the biggest cost is the time taken to sit down with them on the action planning. The instrument itself takes 25 minutes, and a person can do it online, so it really doesn't take an enormous amount of time. As you pointed out, the cost of not doing it is staggering compared to what it is to do it.
And then for some of the executives out there that you've met with, I know sometimes it takes more than one meeting, but let's say in those initial meetings where you've experienced resistance or someone didn't want to move forward quickly, what were some of those objections, and then how did you overcome them to help them see the value in your program?
I think the biggest objection, you know, being as we're men, you know, is having somebody else come in and tell you, you know, what to do, or that they feel like, you know, there's no value in looking at what their people say. You know, the bottom line for me is that in those cases when I can show them the results of other companies and other executives, that tends to reduce the objection from that level. And the other objection that I get a lot is they've had bad experiences with consultants. And we tend to paint everybody with the same brush as though all the programs were similar. And the truth of the matter is that this is not about me. This is not about them. It's about their organization and getting information that otherwise they wouldn't have any access to at all.
You know, Ray, one of the most recognized and significant thought leaders of our time in management is Peter Drucker. And he has a quote that I'm going to, you know, paraphrase, which is, when the facts are clear, the decisions are easy. Can you speak to how your assessment brings out the facts to help decision makers make clear decisions?
Well, I think the most instrumental part is that very few executives take the time to do the sort of analysis that our technology permits them to do. So as a consequence, they're typically working in a vacuum. You know, it's the fog of business that I talked about initially. So what this does, it produces information in a very specific way that enables the company to move forward. So that's really important. But you know, the truth of the matter is this is simply a tool. And unless we have some powerful way to facilitate it, to be able to take this information and use it in a way that now moves from just data to information to knowledge to results, that's the real key. And that's what I think we do in our consulting practice, is make it move from just pieces of information to everybody getting involved and transforming the organization.
You know, Ray, the last question is, there are numerous assessment tools. It sounds like the QuadStrat is very effective, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's just a tool.
Right.
And what the organization gets is the consultant or the coach that's going to come in and help them facilitate the implementation of the results of that tool. So speak to how Anderson Business Coaching separates itself from other consultants out there in that process.
No, that's a good question. Thank you, Jamar. You know, the truth is that every good athlete or every good executive has a coach. And I think that what this does, it simply takes a third-party person like myself who has And I like to say I have no dog in the fight. And so I can ask the hard questions that the executive many times can't, because basically, as Thoreau once said, "Who you are speaks so loudly I can't hear a word you're saying." So what enables us to do as consultants come in and actually break through barriers that internally are impossible to fix. And so that's one of the things that happens, and once we break down those barriers, we find that things happen much more rapidly. And so I'm a coach, and I have my own coaches because I need that help too. So that's what I would say is, and any good executive understands the value of that.
Ray, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jamar.
Please remember, if you have any questions for Mr. Anderson, please feel free to ask them in the comment box below, and we will get them answered for you as quickly as possible. If you are interested in learning more about how the QuadStrat Strategic Assessment Program can benefit your business or organization, please call ACES today at 951-781-8624 or email us at info@ACES, that's ACES, California.org to set up a free 15-minute strategy session. On behalf of ACES, thanks for watching. I'm Jamar Brown.